Hello and welcome to Samfor Uncut, a podcast for developers about building great products. Today, I'm excited to welcome David Burns. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. Can you please just go ahead and introduce yourself?
So I'm David Burns. I am a head of open source at BrowserStack. And what we do there is look after core open source projects that are important to BrowserStack. And we make sure that they are sufficiently funded by either people or with money, depending on kind of what the project is. We're a small engineering group at the moment, looking to grow bigger. And so our core projects are like Selenium and Appium and Nightwatch. In the past, I spent 9.5 years working at Mozilla as engineer and then engineering manager. So I've spent a long time in the open source space. I'm also involved in standards bodies. So I'm the chair of the W3C's working group for browser testing and tools. So anything that we want to standardize to work across the industry will probably come through our group at some point, and we'll see where and how we can kind of make it standard, which makes it easier for all users who want to do testing.
Great. Thanks for this introduction. And I'm sure that a lot of our listeners would love to hear about the space that you have spent a lot of time in, as browser testing and web is definitely a dominant platform. A lot of people on a daily basis writing tests that involve a browser, also debugging them. So I was hoping you can give us a tour of this space that a lot of us are touching in one way or another, but I think that most of us dive in just as much as we need, to get components in place. Is it a Chrome driver, Selenium driver, what it is, and keep going. But we do end up spending a lot of time in debugging. It's, I think, in most cases our fault, but we also tend to blame it on technologies that we are using. So please, if you can elaborate on this topic.
So browser testing has been going for, I don't know, I think Selenium turned 17 or 18 the other week. And it's been important through the browser wars. So kind of it got started there by Jason Huggins while he was at ThoughtWorks working on internal tooling. And then another ThoughtWorks engineer created WebDriver, that's Simon Stewart, and he took a different approach to how you should control a browser. So Selenium would be controlling it from the outside in, which injects JavaScript into the page to kind of manipulate events as you need them, where WebDriver was doing it slightly harder, but kind of in a better way. So it would inject events behind the scenes, so not actually in the page, which meant you had to have deeper integration into the browser. For certain browsers, that was really simple. Like Firefox, you just built an extension and you speak to the extension, which already has the internals. And with Internet Explorer, you had to do weird and wonderful COM interfaces, which if you've ever done COM, you know it's painful, but it works. And you always know roughly what you're going to get. And so we built up from there. And then over the years, we kind of just carried on improving the interfaces and things like that, until one day one of the directors of engineering at Opera approached the project and said, like, you should make this a standard. Like, we can see where you're going. We think it's important and you should make it a standard. And so Simon came back to the project and I was working at Mozilla at the time, and like we had a chat and we said, right, yeah, totally, we should make this a standard. It makes perfect sense. And that was in around 2011. And so we built up the standard to what it is now. It's recommended. Browser vendors have all implemented it. There's a new standard coming out slowly but surely, because what we did then and where the market is going is changing. And so we need to kind of update that, which leads to the WebDriver BiDi specification. So BiDi means bidirectional. Like, in the past, if you wanted to use Selenium, you would have to poll the browser, like, is this thing ready? Is this thing ready? Which can lead to flakiness. And it's partly because people don't fully understand how that side of things can work. And as you said, like, people only deep dive as far as they need to go. And sometimes you need that a little bit deeper to understand where the problems are going to become later. And so that's allowing us to have new APIs that kind of are similar to newer products that are hitting the market and improve how people do their testing. And I think that's the key part here. It's like, is Selenium willing to move with the times and improve it? One of the key things that I think, kind of touching on the subject of like moving with the times, is kind of like, originally Selenium was built to be this underlying API. So kind of, I think the best way to describe it is like, it was supposed to be the database connections to your database, and then someone would build your ORM on top of it. That's how it was originally designed, how we wanted it to do it. Fortunately, unfortunately, it depends on who you speak to. Some people like that you could go, I'm just going to do this, and then they could build their own world on top of it. And we saw like the Googlers doing weird and wonderful things. When I was at Mozilla, we did amazing things with Selenium, from kind of doing basic performance testing, because we could control the whole environment where possible. And, I've seen people doing games testing because they could control it and to the finite detail. And that was really, really cool. But as you mentioned earlier, I like that phrase where you're like, people only dive down as far as they need to go rather than all the way, is that tech people now have to deliver features as quickly as possible, and as quickly as possible tends to mean yesterday, not tomorrow. And I think kind of that mentality, especially being pushed from product managers and project managers, doesn't allow people to understand where things are going. And so like they'll reach the zenith of kind of their flakiness of kind of like, browsers are asynchronous by nature to kind of improve the performance and battery management and things like that, because they can kind of pause and do what they need to in different threads. But people's thinking is not asynchronous, especially when it comes to testing. They will go like, I will want to do step 1, step 2, step 3, and kind of these two worlds really struggle to meld, because kind of they hit these points and then people are like, oh, but I'm not expecting the browser to do that. Why is it doing that? And then obviously it's Selenium's fault or Puppeteer's fault or Cypress, because like, every single one of those tools has the exact same problems because they're all using browsers, and it's just not gelling with the mental models that people have. So it's been a nice history, and where the market is going, I think, is quite cool.
We've just released the CI/CD for MonoRepo's ebook. It's for software engineers who are evaluating or want to optimize the monorepo way of software development. You'll learn how to build a monorepo-first CI/CD pipeline and have a functional microservice application built, tested, and deployed from a monorepo. Check it out on our website, semaphoreci.com/resources/monorepo-CICD.
Maybe from the very practical standpoint, a long time ago, it seemed and there was a default choice and people just went with Selenium. And then you don't have that paradox of choice. And some projects are just starting out and people are deciding, okay, what's the stack that I should, pick and run with it? Or some people are actually migrating from one to the other and, so on. I mean, what would you recommend?
I'll start with new projects. Migrating projects, I think, is a different kettle of fish, and I will get to that. But like new projects, I think the problem that I see a lot in the space at the moment is people seem to have forgotten the basics when it comes to how you set up new projects and how you go about testing it. And so kind of people will knock up their MVP super quick, get it ready, go, yeah, it was in production, then like they'll throw some tests at it. And then kind of cry some more because the new project's not working. Like when they try test it, it's just like, it's not been designed for testing, was not been designed for modularity, which testing kind of enforces. And so we've got to the stage where I think kind of the testing pyramid seems to have been thrown out the window. So the testing pyramid is this concept, for listeners who might not know it, is this concept of kind of you design your tests in kind of a large set for kind of unit tests, a medium set for your integration tests, and then a very small set for like UI or tools like that, where you're kind of going from end to end. And you want to minimize those tests, because as you go up the testing pyramid, you potentially increase the size of the flakiness. And I think that, like, because people have seemed to have thrown that out, some of the other tooling out there compared to Selenium is gaining a lot of traction, because like people struggle with that initial kind of core concept, that they then go, well, I've got this black box, and this black box is solving this problem for me really well. And then they try to scale it out. And anyone who's done any scaling work will know that there is kind of blood, sweat, and tears behind every single bit of scaling. From, anyone who's touched Kubernetes recently, they will tell you all the problems with it. And they don't necessarily know how to solve it, but everyone knows it. And it's because kind of people like go, oh, well, this is this cool thing. It's nice for my CV. I can press this one button and it works brilliantly on my proof of concept, but it doesn't necessarily work in the real world. And so when we look at the market out there, there are a lot of tools that kind of say that they've solved everything for you. And they make big promises. I'm going to name some names, and I'm not kind of saying they're better than Selenium or worse than Selenium. Like, I think they have their place definitely in the market. So like Cypress is a nice kind of black box, is the way I look at Cypress when I compare them to Selenium. And they go, here is your kind of gateway drug. I think it's the best way. Like, this will get you started. It has, like, you want to do API testing, we can do it. If you want to do browser testing, we can do it. And then it's like, oh, you want to now run these all in parallel? Yeah, you're going to have to pay for that part, but you can totally do that, and that's fine. And it gives you this kind of belief that they've solved the Selenium flakiness, and then you kind of leave it for a while, and this Cypress then releases new APIs around waiting. Like, I've got to wait for this new object to appear on the page, and so it's like they're learning from the Selenium lessons in the past, which has had a wait library, I don't know, for at least 9 years, somewhere in that region. And the same story came from Puppeteer. Puppeteer is very good. They're initially Chrome-based. They're kind of Firefox support is being added. And when I was at Mozilla, I was leading the team that was adding it before moving away. And again, there's this belief that they're solving the problem of like waiting and flakiness, and then suddenly like, oh, this real problem still exists, and they add in APIs to add it. And so I kind of go back to like, those are really cool tools depending on your use case. And I think use cases where I don't think a lot of people are putting a lot of effort into the way they think about their tools, or like, again, come back to Kubernetes. Everyone's talking about Kubernetes. Can I release it quickly into some cloud provider and just press a button? And it's like, yeah, you can, but then is it going to scale? Is it going to have this? Is it going to like still be secure? Like that, core problems that I think people easily forget about because they try to put certain amounts of developer experience in the tooling above all else. And I think that's not a good thing.
Yeah. Something that I can contribute here, I mean, how things are looking at the ground. I'm speaking about, let's say, most successful customers that we have. Goes like this: you put the absolute minimum effort in the beginning. Of course, about, you're not too involved about your testing pyramid, and the distribution of tests and so on, because you're just getting started, and, amount of money that you are dealing with, and, number of developers and all that. And you just said, can this be done for yesterday? And then it's a pattern. Comes a series, investment series, where they get, something, north of 50 million. And then development teams jumps from 20 or 15, 20 engineers to 100, 150 in less than 2 years, year and a half. Features need to continue flowing out, going out. Yes, test suite goes crazy because just a lot of people building web apps. Initially it's very cheap, not investing, okay, so I'm going to build my unit test like this. It will cover this layer, and then I'm going to do this through the integration test. And then, as you said, just this top part I'm going to cover with something goes from, hard drive all the way to, click in the browser. That click in the browser gets, as you presented, essentially abused in a way, used so much. On the other hand, I can say it's good for our business. People have to parallelize, their test suite across 50 or 100 jobs in parallel in order to get the feedback loop, quick enough so they can survive. And usually a part of the conversation is, okay, a strategy needs to be put in place because if you guys keep growing your test suite in this way, with these very expensive, also very flaky tests, hard to scale, it's not going to run. So essentially, I guess I repeated everything that you said. But I mean, we really have a lot of samples like that. The more successful the companies are, the bigger problems they have in terms of, testing.
Oh, definitely. I've seen one case I've seen recently, and I've seen this with a competitor. So one of the nice things about working in an open source program office is that if a competitor has one, I get to speak to my competitors regularly about things, and they're very open because open source people are very open. Obviously, no names I ever mention, but I've heard this from internally, and I've heard this from competitors. Is like, we're dropping Selenium, we're migrating to something else. 6 months later, we're dropping that thing and we're moving half the test suite back to Selenium. And, this is the thing of kind of where I say, like, the testing pyramid seems to have been thrown out. And yes, like I've worked, when I was at Mozilla, I joined before kind of B2G, the BoottoGecko project, which kind of became the Firefox OS project. And Mozilla grew so fast. It was my first time ever seeing a company grow so fast ever. When I joined BrowserStack, we were at the beginning of that, like, shooting up. And yeah, like, it's so easy to kind of like have problems of kind of your code is scaled out and you're having these kind of problems. It's like, oh, I'll just kind of move to this other tool and I'll become my nirvana. And like, it rarely does. And so when I was at Mozilla, I've moved around in the developer experience space. I spent all my time in developer experience. It was around tooling. So we made Gecko Driver and we made that really awesome and simple to use. And like, you didn't have to worry about upgrading. So like, earlier you were like, oh, what version do I have to use for this or that or the next thing? One of the key things that I wanted for Gecko Driver is like, upgrade when you need to, not because you have to. And then you kind of see the Chromium-based browsers will be like, Chrome Driver needs to be upgraded every version. And I'm sure like if you're putting this into your CI system, kind of that's every 4 to 6 weeks nowadays. And like, it's a non-trivial amount of work.
And it's sharp, it breaks things.
Yeah. People just think you just upgrade one line and that's it. It's like, not always, because now you've got to deal with all the fallout of any potential bugs that it's introduced, right? And it's a lot of work. It's hard. And I think caring about the speed, as you said, right? Like, yes, it's good for you when tools are abused because as your company, you can kind of sell more, like your solution is scalable, so you can sell that better. But that also then potentially costs teams. And so like people go, oh, I is this really worth it? And then it's like, oh, it must be the tool space. And that's what you were saying earlier. Like, it's not necessarily like, Past me has written really bad code and past me is really bad at coding. And I go back and fix all them and make it better and faster. And, and that's where I think a lot of the tooling is. And like, that's where like me on the Selenium project is trying to take the Selenium project is try, help people fix those problems by being aware of it. But then as we more move into similar APIs as like Playwright or Cypress or Puppeteer, there's other problems that we're running into because like we're hitting these scalability problems again, because like instead of like being this HTTP socket that we're constantly speaking to, it's a WebSocket, but the WebSocket can speak back to you. And, if you're not careful, suddenly you're like doing a denial of service onto your test servers by accident. And that's going to be the next foot down. It's like, oh, my tests are not flaky anymore, but my server keeps dying. Like, why? You know what I mean?
We've just released the CI/CD for MonoRepo's ebook. It's for software engineers who are evaluating or want to optimize the monorepo way of software development. You'll learn how to build a monorepo-first CI/CD pipeline and have a functional microservice application built, tested, and deployed from a monorepo. Check it out on our website, semaphoreci.com/resources/monorepo-CICD.
Going from here, let's speak maybe more about the future. You mentioned about generally standard implementation of a driver or let's say a specification in the API. And you mentioned at that point something about being bidirectional and so on. Can you give us maybe a tour of that? That might be useful for people.
So I kind of alluded to it so far in my discussion, but so WebDriver BiDi is kind of the term we're calling it. And it's about having Selenium be able to speak to a browser and the browser speak back to it. So kind of one of the key things that a lot of people wanted, and we've seen this through Puppeteer and we're seeing it with Playwright, Cypress kind of, but Cypress architecturally can't do all of it, is that they want to know when certain things happen in the browser and then carry on. And so we are now creating, originally WebDriver was HTTP because it was simple and standard and it scales massively, right? Like that's how BrowserStack, for example, is able to scale. We just need to be able to process HTTP requests when we get them and process them properly and fastly and correct, and which is awesome. Moving to the bidirectional way is that so it can speak back to you, which is great for like if you want to know while your test is running, is there like a JavaScript exception suddenly thrown? Like, how can I handle that? Or you want to know when a console message has come out. So like you add a certain console message to help with flakiness, for example. You can handle that. So we're adding these new APIs around like console logging, JavaScript exceptions, coming back from the browser rather than like, actually, was there a message for me? No, there hasn't. I'll wait a little bit and then try again. Like you don't have to wait because you know it's going to come towards you. So there's features like that. We're going to hopefully be taking the whole WebDriver project to kind of sit on top of these new APIs. So when people use WebDriver, it's still going to look the same. It's still going to act the same. However, how it does it underneath is potentially going to change. And it opens up a whole new world of kind of new features that we want. And we can make things better. But sometimes moving it in that direction has its own problems. Like, you know, it's all about kind of balancing the books. And like, you know, if you ask for console messages and you've put your debug version into production by accident, suddenly you're going to get like, you know, 1,000 console messages a second, potentially, because you're just emitting different, like into this function, you know what I mean? And so it can get really hairy very quickly.
Yeah, clear. You spent a lot of time at Mozilla, and if you can potentially give us your view on the current state of browsers and alignment and all that. I know that, I mean, this is very, very high level, and I'm obviously not deep in this topic, but Safari is still making kind of problems, you know, in terms of, you know, following the APIs and all that. It's kind of lagging a little bit behind. Otherwise, from, I would say, average developer use case perspective, Chrome or Firefox are playing nicely. What's your insider view on browsers?
I'm only still in the browser world through standards nowadays. Everything I say, I'm caveating with that. So it's not like knife edge, but I think Safari is getting some unfair press at the moment. And I really think this. One of my last groups that I managed at Mozilla was the kind of interoperability team. And one of our key tasks was managing the W3 test suite internally. So we would make a copy of the W3C's test suite. Well, it's not W3C's anymore, but like it's called web platform tests. And we would run those against Firefox and then try process them. And we would upstream whenever there was an internal change and downstream them when in external changes. So we always wanted to keep that test suite up to date. And we were doing pretty well. I haven't looked at the numbers, but like we were doing pretty well back then. I think Firefox and Chrome were only 1% difference, and that 1% is not APIs that a lot of people would care about, right? So kind of it was fine. Safari was lagging behind. But why I think there's a bit of unfair pressure is that like every time Google adds a new API, especially for like Project Fugu, which is around making like mobile features in browsers. So like web USB, things like that, for example, adding those in, Safari might be lagging behind in them. And I think it's okay because like there's standards out there. Browsers can pick and choose what they want and they can make sure that it aligns with their market, like how they see their market. I've always felt that the Safari team is under resourced, especially for the amount of money and size of, I think kind of they could definitely hire a lot more engineers. But driving that, I think, is important. And so, like, Safari is focused on battery life and done fantastic. So, like, you could open, if you've got a MacBook, open up Safari, use that as your day-to-day browser, and your battery life is amazing. You open up Chrome on the exact same machine, and you might, only get half to 2/3 of the battery life. And it's about kind of the focus that's different. I don't necessarily agree with all the Fugu APIs that are being added. Some of them are really good. Some of them are just like, why would you really need that? And the pretense behind it, I don't always agree with, but like, that's just opinions. But I think it's unfair on the Apple engineers because they are doing really good things and they're focusing on what's good for Apple. It's like, Firefox is focusing on what it can do to stay relevant in the market. And so its engineering team got cut down quite considerably last year with layoffs. And so, like, looking at that, it's like they are going to start falling behind. And unlike Apple, who are pre-installed on laptops, it's going to be harder to keep up. But I still believe browser diversity is good. Like, everyone moving to Chrome, I think, is a bad thing. I use Firefox as my default browser because I still believe in the mission of Firefox and improving the web and the internet for everyone and going from there.
Now that you shined a bit more light on it from a different perspective, all the browsers coming from very different places and trying to solve different things, what are important for them. And yeah, it seems that from the specifications perspective, for the majority of the use cases that we generally have, they are aligned well enough to serve everything. Yeah. Maybe a last question from me. You mentioned that you are focusing on open source strategy of BrowserStack, and there are a number of projects involved here. Developers are always searching for something new, to more know about or potentially join. Can you talk a bit more about that? What are the projects that you're focusing on? Where do you see the help is needed?
So all the projects I mentioned going forward always need help. And we are eternally grateful to anyone who can contribute some time to open source. And I appreciate this is not a space that a lot of people can do or they don't feel comfortable doing. Sometimes people get scared going into open source. All of these projects I mentioned are really awesome about helping new contributors, especially people who might want to learn coding while contributing. So like, anyone can help out here. So the main one that I kind of help out on is the Selenium project. Personally, I look after the Python and JavaScript. Those are kind of my core languages areas and help out there, as well as I'm part of the technical leadership. So kind of like Selenium always needs help and there's always bugs. I think we just passed on GitHub 10,000 issues and pull requests at the end of last week. So it's still a vibrant community. And so people are still using it, still raising bugs, still submitting pull requests, which is awesome. The next one is Appium, which is kind of like Selenium, but for mobile applications. And the community there is awesome. Like, one of the nice things about kind of the Selenium project and Appium is like the people there genuinely want to help. And I've seen in both communities, like, people come in and go, I have no idea how to program, but I need to do this for my job. And people like teach them basic programming and then help them through. And so kind of, I really love these projects because of how they focus on community wonderfully and go there. And so the Appium project could always do with people, they're working towards their version 2. Selenium's just released version 4. They're moving forward at a really good pace. And so kind of, if you have time, help out there. The other one that we contribute to is a project called Nightwatch.js. We've seen a lot of BrowserStack customers using it, and it's built on top of Selenium. And so it's a test runner and it has all the things that you need. And so we've got some people helping out there. And that project is a really cool project. There's some really nice people there again. So if you have some time, kind of help out there. So github.com/nightwatchjs, come out there. I hear JavaScript is an important language for the web these days. So I'm sure one or two people might know it. And if you can help, or, and if you're a bit worried about kind of getting started in any of these projects, I'm going to do a slight plug, but it's more to help open source projects, is that twice a week I do a Twitch stream on getting people started in open source and getting them feeling comfortable. And so I don't plug any projects there. I don't plug BrowserStack. It's just about getting people started and come hang out, code with me, or ask questions, and I'll help you get started. Because I truly believe in open source. Like, it's part of my DNA nowadays because I've been in it for so long.
Great. And I love hearing this. Twitch and generally all that new format is amazing. I now regret that, 15 years ago, something like that wasn't around. I remember when I wanted to get into open source, there were like mailing lists where you cannot connect really a face to a name and to a project and all that. And I'm really super excited and happy to hear that you have those Twitch streams and people can, join.
I get paid by BrowserStack, but I'm not promoting them. And so I'm happy to look at anything that kind of fits into my area of expertise. Like, I'm not going to help you with some CSS stuff because CSS is magic to me, and anyone who can do it is amazing, but I can't. But I will help you with how to build a browser and how to do testing and that side, and developer experience and scaling systems. So anything and everything is welcome in that stream, as long as it's about kind of helping people.
Amazing. Great. Thank you so much for your time, and good luck.
Awesome. Thank you.